In this Blender tutorial, I'll show you how to create these 4 procedural plastic materials. And if you'd like to purchase these procedural materials, you can get them with the links in the video description on my Gumroad store and Patreon page. And in this tutorial, as well as showing you how to create each of the plastic materials, I'll also be showing you how to join them together into these custom node groups so you can customize the look of the material. Now, if you'd just like to create one of these materials, then I'll have timestamps in the video description and you can just jump to a certain part in this video and learn how to create one of the materials. But for anyone who's purchased the material, I'm going to go over each material and show you the different node group settings. And you can also check out my Ultimate Blender Procedural Material Pack if you'd like to purchase all of my procedural materials. Now, because I've finished creating these new materials, I've just updated my Ultimate Blender Procedural Material Pack with all of these new materials. So these materials here are my latest materials, so all of these materials have just been added to my Ultimate Blender Procedural Material Pack. So if you're one of my customers of my Ultimate Material Pack, then you can re-download the product files to get the updates with all of these new materials. You can also just purchase my most recent procedural materials by checking out my next procedural material pack, and the links to that will be in the video description if you just want to purchase these materials. And to learn how to create more materials, you can check out my Blender Procedural Material Tutorial playlist. So the first material is this latex material. So there's the scale to change the size of the entire material. Then there is the base color, so you can make this whatever color you want. Then there is this fold scale. So you can see there's these little folds in the latex, so you can make the folds smaller or bigger. Then there's also the folds randomized, so you can kind of randomize how the folds are. And then there's the folds distortion. So you can kind of distort the folds, make them more distorted or less distorted. Then there's also the folds rotation. So right now they're kind of going up and down, but you can just rotate the folds if you want to. Then there's also the folds rotation. So the folds are going up and down right now, but you can rotate the folds and change their direction. Then there also is this noise scale. So there's just a tiny little bit of noise over the surface. So if you want to turn up that noise scale or turn it down, you can. There's also a detail level for the noise, and then also a roughness level for the noise. Then there's also the clear coat weight. So if you want to add some extra clear coat, that's just going to add kind of a shiny surface over the material. And then there's also the roughness for the clear coat. So you can have it really rough or shiny. Then there is the roughness of the material. That's just the roughness of the latex. Then there is the folds bump strength. So you can see there's these tiny little folds. If I kind of go to the top here, there's kind of these little folds. So you can turn up the strength to make it stronger if you want to, or turn the strength down. And then there's also a very subtle noise over the surface. So you can turn that up and down to change the noise. The next procedural material is this translucent plastic. So for this, there is the scale to change the texture size. Then there is a base color, so you can change this to whatever color you want. Then there is also the amount of translucency. So if you turn it down, it's more of just like a hard plastic. If you turn it up, it's more of a soft plastic. You can kind of see through the plastic. Then there's also this noise roughness scale. So there's a little bit of a texture kind of going into the noise. So you can change the scale of that. Then there's also this coat weight, which is just a little bit of extra shine on the surface, and the roughness of that clear coat. And then there's a clear coat tint if you want to change the tint of that. Then there is the roughness of the plastic. And then there is the Voronoi bump scale. So there's just a little bit of bump over the surface. And then there's also the bump strength. It is pretty hard to see, but if you zoom in really closely, there you can see there's just a little bit of subtle bump over the material. Then the next material is this basic plastic material. And this basic plastic has a few tiny little scratches, but you can also get rid of the scratches if you don't want them. So there's the scale to change the size of the scratches. Now, if I turn the base color down to make it a little bit darker, you can kind of see those scratches a little bit better. So I'll just show you the material settings. So you can change the scale, then you can just change the scale of the scratches. And then of course there is the base color of the plastic. Then you can also change the noise scale. So that noise is going into the roughness. Then there's 2 different detail values for the noise roughness. Then you can change the roughness of the plastic. So you can make it a really shiny plastic or a rough plastic. And there's also the scratches roughness. So the scratches are a bit more rough, but if you turn that down, the scratches are going to be more shiny. And there's also a bump strength for the scratches. So if you want to make the scratches disappear, you can turn the roughness to 0 on the scratches and then turn the bump strength to 0. And now there aren't any scratches. Then the last material is a clear plastic material, and I thought a cool example would be like a clear pipe. So there is a scale to change the size of the texture. Then there's the base color, so I just have it as a white color. And then there is the line scale. So you can kind of see in the normal, there are these tiny little lines. Of course, if you want to get rid of them, you can just turn down the bump strength. But there's these tiny little lines, which I noticed was commonly on like plastic tubes. So there is this line scale, so you can make more lines or less lines. And then there's also some little subtle scratches. So if I look right here, you can see there's just a few subtle scratches, so you can change the scale of the scratches, and then there's also 2 detail values to change the amount of detail on the scratches. Then you can change the roughness of the entire material, and then there is the transmission, which is the transparency, so you can have it be a clear plastic, or if I turn the transmission down, now it's just kind of a basic white plastic. And then there is 2 different bump strengths, so there's the lines bump strength, so that little bump there, and then also the scratches bump strength. So before we create the materials, I'll show you what I have set up in the 3D viewport if you want to set up the blend file the same way that I have, but if you just want to jump straight to the material creation, then use the timestamps in the description. So for the latex material, I thought it would be cool to add it to like a thin rubbery object. So to create this, I just added a sphere and then added a subdivided plane. Then I added cloth physics to the plane and the collision physics to the sphere, and I just simulated it so that the cloth fell on the sphere, and then I just applied the cloth simulation. Then I shaded the cloth object smooth, and I also gave it a solidify so it has thickness, and then gave it a subdivision so it's nice and smooth. And if you've never used cloth physics and you don't know how to do this, then you can check out my cloth physics for beginners tutorial. Link to that will be in the description. As for the other objects, I went to the add menu and went to mesh, and I added an icosphere, and right behind me on the add icosphere settings, I turned the subdivisions up to 6 so it is nice and smooth and round, and then I'll shade the object smooth, and then I'll scale the object down by 0.2 and then hit Ctrl A and apply the scale, and added 2 of those objects, so 2 objects here and there for those other 2 materials. Then for the cylinder, I went to the add menu and I just added a cylinder, and I just went into edit mode, scaled the cylinder way down, scaled it up on the z-axis, and then back in object mode I just kind of rotated it over like that. Then in edit mode I selected both of the faces and I just deleted the faces. Then I just added some modifiers to this, so I started off by adding the subdivision surface modifier and then I shaded it smooth. Then I added the solidify modifier just to give it a little bit of thickness, and then after that I added the bevel modifier, and then I just turned up the segments up to like a 3 and turned the amount down so the bevel was pretty small, so we just have a really small bevel. And then finally I added the weighted normal modifier to kind of sharpen those flat faces. So that's really all the modeling for the pipe. It was pretty easy to model. Now as for the lighting, I added this area light right here. So if you go to the area light settings, I made the color white, I turned the power to 100, and I also turned the shape to disk. I just kind of pointed it here on the side of the objects to give it some nice lighting. And then also I went here to the world properties and I added in the Machine Shop 02 1K HDRI from polyhaven.com. So the links are in the video description if you want to download it. I downloaded the 1K HDR version. So to add in the HDRI, you can just click on the yellow dot next to color and you can choose environment texture and then just click on the open button and open up the downloaded HDRI. Now also if I go up here to the render properties, I'm going to go down here to the film tab and I'm going to turn on the transparent button so the background is transparent. And then also if you open up the color management, I set the view transform to filmic and I set the look to very high contrast. And because I am going for realism, I will be using the Cycles rendering engine in this tutorial. So I'm in the shading workspace, so I have the 3D viewport right over here, and I'm in the rendered mode. And then I have the shader editor right over here, so I'll just make this full screen. And what I'm going to do is just select the other objects and hide them from now, so they're out of the way. And I'm just going to select the latex object. So I'll click on new to add a new material, and I can just call this latex. And then I will also be using the Node Wrangler add-on in the video, so to enable that you can click on edit, you can go to the preferences, and then over here on the add-ons tab you can search for Node and just enable the Node Wrangler add-on, and I'll show you how to use it in the video. So for this latex material, I want to create some folds, which will be going into the normal to give it some bump, so it looks like there's going to be folds. So to do this, I'm going to search for the Gabor texture. Let's add the Gabor texture, and then I'll Control Shift select the Gabor texture to preview it, and I'm going to hit Control T with the Gabor texture selected. That's using the Node Wrangler, and it's going to add the texture coordinate mapping, and I'm going to use the object coordinates because the object coordinates will place the texture on the object more evenly. So if you kind of look around here at the texture, the Gabor texture, if I turn up the scale here, you can see it basically has all these little streaks, but it's a little bit random and some spots are faded here and there. So this will work really well to look like some folds in the fabric. So what I'm going to do is turn the scale to 15, and then I'll leave all the other settings how they are. But what I want to do is have another texture which can kind of distort the Gabor texture. So I'm going to search for a noise texture and put it here after the mapping. And so you can see by putting the noise texture before the Gabor, it's distorting the placement of the Gabor. But I want the distortion to be less strong. So I'm going to search for linear light and add the mix color linear light node and just drop it right here. Let's just drag the principled shader over. And what I'm going to do is put the noise color into color B, and then I'm going to take the mapping vector and put that into color A. So now with this linear light here, we are blending between the mapping which isn't distorted and the noise which is distorted. So if I turn the factor up and down, you can see it's going to distort the gabor more and more. Now I'm going to make the default value 0, so just turn it to 0, so it's not distorting it at all. But just for now, I'm going to actually turn the factor up so you can kind of see it being distorted. And what I want to do is change the noise settings. So you could turn up like the detail and the roughness and things, but if I turn up the detail, that doesn't really look like fabric folds, that looks really noisy. It needs to be smooth. So I'm going to leave all the settings how they are, but the scale, I'm going to turn that to 2 on the noise. So now if I turn up the factor, you can see it's kind of being more and more distorted, but it still looks like fabric folds. But the default value is going to be 0, so I'll turn it to 0, but we can use that later in the custom node group to just kind of distort the fabric. And then also you can see there is this value right here, which we can use to kind of randomize the folds. And then under this value, there's also the orientation, so I can use this to rotate the folds around if I want to. So now what I want to do is add this into the bump. So I'm going to search for a bump node to convert it to bump data, and let's drop it here. And I want to put the gabor value into the height value. So now if I turn up the distance value, you can see it's kind of bumping it out and making it look like folds, but I'm going to make the distance value very subtle. So I'm going to turn it to a 0.005, just a 0.005. So now you can see there's like some little folds in the fabric, and let's put the normal into the normal, and I'll just Control Shift select the principled shader. Now it's a little bit hard to see right now, but that's because the texture is so white. So what I'm going to do is make the base color kind of like this green color, kind of a dark green, but you can make it whatever color you want. And if you want to punch in the same hex code to get the same green color, you can punch in 41612D. Then I'm also going to turn the roughness value to a 0.2 so it's a bit more shiny, and now you can start to see those folds a little bit better in that latex. Then I'm also going to open up the coat settings, and I'm going to leave the coat settings to 0 for now, but if you want to turn this up, you can add that into the custom node group and control the clear coat. Now the other thing that I want to do is just add a tiny little bit of noise over the surface so it's not perfectly flat. I just want to make it slightly noisy. So what I'm going to do is search for a noise texture and drop this right up here. And let's use the same vector. So we'll take the vector of the mapping and put that into the noise texture. Now let's just preview the noise texture. So I'm going to turn the scale to 100, and I'll turn the detail up to 10, and I'll turn the roughness to a 0.3. And I'm also going to turn the lacunarity to 3. And then I'll turn the distortion up just a little bit to 0.1. So now I want to put this into the bump as well. So let's just box select these nodes and drag them back. And I'm going to duplicate this bump node and drop it right up here. Now this normal can go into the normal of this one. But now what I can do is I can take this noise texture and we can put that into the height value of this bump. So if I Control Shift select the principled shader, you can see now it looks way too bumpy and that doesn't really look like plastic. So let's make it very, very subtle. So I'm going to turn the distance on this bump to a 0.0002. So now you can see there's just a very subtle little noise, so it just looks slightly more realistic, but you can of course change the strength of that with the strength value right there. So that's the procedural material, so let's join it together into a node group. So I'm going to box select all the nodes except the material output, and I'll hit Control G to join it together into a node group. I'll hit the tab key to go outside the node group, and I'm going to drag the node group right down here, and then I'll drag the node group out to make it bigger so we can see it better, and then I'm going to copy the material name, and I'll paste it here into the node group. Let's hit the tab key to go into the node group, and I'll hit the N key to open up the side panel. And if you go to the group tab, I'm going to double click on the socket here, and I'm just going to rename this to shader and hit enter because I like that better instead of calling it VSDF. So now we have this group input, and we can plug up all the custom values to the group input, and then we'll be able to control them outside of the node group. So this mapping is plugged up to all the textures, so the scale will control the entire size of the material. So we'll put the scale into the extra socket. Let's click on the scale, and you can see the scale is going to be 3 values, but I just want it to be 1 value. So we'll take the type from vector, and we're going to turn it to float, so it is 1 value. And then we need to turn the default value to 1, and then we need to hit tab to go out of the node group, and we need to turn the scale back to 1. So let's tab back into the node group. Then I want to control the base color, so let's just drag the group input right up here, and we're going to take the base color and stick it into the extra socket. Then I want to control the fold scale, so let's drag the group input down here underneath the gabor texture. And I'm going to put the gabor texture scale into the extra socket, and then I can click on this to rename it, and I'm going to rename this to folds scale. Then I want to take this value right here, and this kind of makes it a bit more random, so I'm going to put this value into the extra socket, and I'm going to rename this to folds randomize. Then I want to control the distortion of the folds. So if I turn up this factor here on the linear light, that's distorting the folds. So I'll put the factor into the extra socket, and I'll just rename that to folds distortion. Then I want to control the rotation of the folds. So you can see there's this orientation, which I can use to rotate the folds on the gabor. So I'll put the orientation into the extra socket. Let's open this up to make it bigger. And I'm going to rename this to Folds Rotation. Then I want to control the noise settings, so I'll drag the group input right up here. And I'm going to put the scale and the detail and the roughness into the extra sockets. And then I can just click on these to rename them. And I'm just going to call it Noise Scale, Noise Detail, and Noise Roughness. Then I want to control the coat settings, so I'm going to drag the group input right down over here, and there's the clear coat settings. So let's put the weight into the extra socket, and then the roughness into the extra socket, so we now have the clear coat, weight, and roughness. Then I want to control the roughness of the material, so we'll just take the principled shader roughness and put that into the extra socket, and then I want to control the bump strengths. So let's first take this bump strength here, this is controlling the folds, and we'll put this one into the extra socket, and we can rename this to Folds Bump Strength. Then we're going to take the other one here, and that's controlling the noise. So we'll put this strength value into the extra socket. And this one I'm going to call Noise Bump Strength. So I'm going to take the group input and drag it over here to the end. I'll hit the N key to close the side panel, and I'll hit Tab to go outside the node group. So here's the final material. So we have the overall scale. You can also change the base color. You can change the size of the folds, the randomized folds, and the distortion of the folds. You can also rotate the folds around. Then you can change the different noise settings. We also have the clear coat if you just want to add extra shine, and you can also change the roughness of the clear coat. Then there's the roughness of the latex, and the folds and the noise bump strength. So that's it for the first procedural material. I'm going to hit Alt-H to bring back the objects, and let's click on the second material. I'm going to save the project, and let's add a new material. And this material I'm going to call Translucent Plastic. So for this material, I'm going to start by searching for a Voronoi texture to give a little bit of surface bump. I'm also going to select all of these other objects and hide them just so that the viewport renders faster. So let's Control-Shift select the Voronoi to preview it. I'll also hit Control-T, and then we're going to use the object coordinates. So I'm going to turn the scale to 1000, not 100, but 1000, so it's really small. And I'll leave the other settings how they are. So I'm going to put the distance of the Voronoi into the normal to give it some bump, but then I want to search for a bump node to convert it to bump data. So let's drop it between the Voronoi and the principled, and the distance is going to go into the height value. So now I can Control-Shift select the principled shader. And for the base color, I'm going to make it kind of this nice light blue color. And if you want to use the same hex code, you can punch in 9B, C3, E7. And I'm going to zoom in here so that you can see it a bit better. Now it's a little bit too bumpy, so I want to make it more subtle. So I'm going to turn the distance value to a 0.0001. And now you can see it's much more subtle. Now I also want to make it really smooth because you can see it's a little bit sharp here on the edges. So I'm going to turn the filter width to 10. And if I turn the filter width to 10, now if I just turn up the distance value so you can see it better, it's going to look a lot smoother. If I just like turn the strength up to like a 6, you can kind of see if the filter width is way down, it's really sharp, but if the filter width is way up, it's a lot more smooth. Now what I want to do is add a little bit of variation to the roughness, so I'm going to search for a noise texture. Let's put it above the Voronoi, and we can use the same vector and the mapping. Let's preview the noise texture, and I'll change the settings. So I'll turn the scale to like a 200, I'll turn the detail to 12, and the roughness up to 1, so it's really detailed. Also, I'm going to turn the lacunarity up to like a 3, and the lacunarity kind of adds a little bit of a dots texture, so I kind of like that. And then I'll also turn the distortion up to 0.2, so it just looks slightly distorted. Now what I'm going to do is put the factor into the roughness, and I'll Control-Shift select the principled shader, but you can see it looks quite rough and I want to make it more shiny. So to control the colors, to control the shine, I'm going to search for a ramp and add a color ramp and drop this right here. And now you can see if I make the colors lighter, it's going to be more rough, but if I make the colors darker, it's going to be more shiny. Now I want these two color tabs to be almost exactly the same so that the roughness variation is very subtle. So on this side here, this roughness value, the hex code for this color is going to be 838383, and then this lighter color, it's very slightly lighter, this is going to be a hex code of 9C, 9C, 9C. But if I preview the principled shader, you can just kind of play around with this and kind of look at the reflections and make it lighter and darker until you get kind of the variation that you want. And then also in the custom node group, I want to search for a hue saturation value and put this after the color ramp. And this way we'll have a value which we can drag up and down. And so that's going to make it lighter and darker. So that's going to control the roughness of the material in the node group. Now to make this really look like the translucent plastic, I want to open up the transmission. And I'm going to turn the transmission weight all the way up to 1 so light can go through the mesh. Then I'm going to open up the coat here, so the clear coat, and I'm going to turn the clear coat all the way up to 1, and then I'll turn the roughness to a 0.1. So that way there's just a little bit of shine over the surface. And then also you can see that this clear coat also has a normal, so I'm going to take the same bump normal and put that into the normal of the clear coat, and that way the clear coat also has the same bump. So So that is it. That is the translucent plastic material. So I'm going to box select all these nodes, and I'm going to hit Control G to join them together into a node group. And I'll hit the tab key to go outside the node group, and we'll just drag the node group over here, and let's just make the node group bigger, and I will copy the material name and paste it here into the node group, and then I want to rename the BSDF. So if we go back into the node group, I'll hit the N key to open up the side panel, and if you go to the group tab, you can just double click on the socket and rename that to shader. So now we can take this group input and plug up all the custom values. So let's put the scale from the mapping into the extra socket to control the size of the entire material. And if I click on the scale, let's click on the type here. And instead of vector, we're going to change it to float. And that way it's going to be 1 value instead of 3. But then I want to turn the default value back to 1. And then I want to hit tab to go outside the node group. And we're going to turn the scale back to 1. So that'll change the size of the textures. So let's go back into the node group. Now I want to add the base color, so I'm going to drag the group input right up here, and we'll put the base color into the extra socket. Then I want to control the translucency, so we'll just drag this down here. We'll put the transmission weight into the extra socket, and I'll just rename this to translucency. Then I want to control the noise settings, so we'll drag the group input right up here, and we'll put the scale into the extra socket. And I'm just going to rename this to noise roughness scale. Then I want to control the coat settings, so we'll drag the group input back over here, and let's put the weight, so the coat weight and the coat roughness into the extra sockets. And we'll also put the tint into the extra socket. So we have the coat weight, the coat roughness, and the coat tint. Then I want to control the roughness of the material, so we'll drag the group input right up here, and we'll put the value into the extra socket. So the value is going to make it lighter and darker, so that'll control the roughness. So we'll double click on this to rename it and just call it roughness. Then I want to control the Voronoi scale. So if we drag the group input back here, we'll put the scale into the extra socket. And I'm going to call this Voronoi bump scale. Then we'll take the strength value and put that into the extra socket. So that's the bump. And I'm just going to rename this to bump strength. So let's just drag the group input right up here, and I'll hit the N key to close the side panel, and I'll hit the tab key to go outside the node group. And so now we can just review the final material. So we have the scale to change the size of the textures. You can also change the base color. Then we have the translucency of the plastic. Then we have the noise roughness scale. You can also change the coat weight, which is that extra shine, and then also the clear coat roughness. And then we have the tint of that clear coat. Then we have the roughness of the material. We also have the Voronoi bump scale, which is really hard to see right now because it's very subtle, but I do want it to be pretty subtle because, I do want it to be a smooth plastic. And then finally, the bump strength. So if you turn this way up more, if I turn it up to like a 10, you'll be able to see a lot better, but it's a very small, subtle bump. So let's hit Alt-H to unhide everything. So that is the translucent plastic. I'm now going to select the next object here, and I'm going to save the project, and I'll add a new material. And this one, I'm just going to rename this to basic plastic. So I'm going to start by making these scratches. So to make the scratches, I'm going to search for a noise texture. Let's preview the noise and hit Control T, and we're going to use the object coordinates. And let's change the noise settings. So I'm going to turn the scale to 20, and I'll turn the detail up to 10, and then I'll turn the roughness to a 0.6. And then the distortion, I'll turn that up to a 1 so it's more distorted. Then what I'm going to do is duplicate the noise texture and put this one before the other noise texture. So this noise texture is going to distort the other noise texture, but it is a bit too distorted, so I'm going to change the noise settings. So I'm going to turn the scale of this to 4, so it's a lot smaller. And I'm going to turn the roughness back to a 0.5. And I'll turn the distortion of this to 2. Now this doesn't really look like scratches right now. It is a pretty cool texture, but it's not looking like scratches. And so we're going to add a color ramp, and we're going to put the color ramp after both of the noise textures. And what we're going to do is drag these values together to make it really contrasty. And now you can see it's starting to look like scratches. So I'm going to drag the black tab kind of to about here, and then I'll just drag the white tab kind of back to about there. So now you can see there's just some little scratches here and there over the material. Now what I want to do is search for a bump node to convert it to bump data. So let's drag these nodes back here. We'll drop the bump here, and we're going to put the color into the height value of the bump, and then the bump normal can go into the normal, the principled shader. And let's just preview the principled shader. Now I'm going to make the base color really dark, and then maybe turn the roughness down just so you can see the scratches a little bit better. But the scratches are a little bit too strong. You can see them too well. So I'm going to turn the distance value to a 0.0003 and hit enter so that it's more subtle. And then you can change the strength with that value there. Now what I also want to do is add another noise texture, which we're going to be putting into the roughness. So we'll search for a noise texture, drop this here, and the vector can go into the vector of the noise. We'll preview the noise. So this is going to go into the roughness to just add slight variation to make the plastic look like it has some parts which are slightly more rough and slightly more shiny. So I'm going to turn the scale to a 15, and I'll turn the detail up to 12, and I'll turn the roughness to a 0.7. Now, if I just took the noise texture factor and put it into the roughness and previewed the principled shader, there is kind of variation in the roughness, but I think the variation is too strong, and I also want it to be a bit more shiny. So what I'm going to do is search for ramp and add a color ramp and drop this between the noise and the principled shader. So now we can change the colors. So if they're darker, it's going to be more shiny, but if it's lighter, they're going to be more rough. So on this color ramp here, this value I'm going to keep fully black, but then this value I'm going to make kind of like a mid-gray color. And if you want to use the same hex code, it's going to be B1, B1, B1. So now I like how that roughness is looking. But what I want to do is mix in the noise texture down here, because that noise texture is where the scratches are. And I want to make the scratches look more rough, because they wouldn't be quite as shiny. They'd probably be a bit more rough because they're scratches. So what I'm going to do is search for lighten, and I'm going to add the mix color lighten. And I'm going to drop this here after the color ramp. Now what I'm going to do is take the bottom color ramp, which is the scratches, and I'm going to put that into the factor. And then here on color B, I'm going to make this fully white. So now if I Control Shift select the lighten, you can see color B here, that is going to be the color of the scratches. And because I'm making it fully white, you can see the scratches are going to be more white. So if I preview the principled shader, the scratches are going to be more rough. But I do want to make that a little bit stronger and more visible. So I'm going to select this color ramp and duplicate it and drop it here right after this one, but before the lighten. And then with the color ramp selected, I'll hit the backspace, and that's going to reset the color ramp. Then I'm just going to drag this white tab way over here to make it more rough. So let's just drag it right over there. So if I just preview the color ramp, you can see before it's kind of dim, but as I drag the white tab over, it's making it much sharper. So if I preview the lighten, you can see the scratches are more visible. So if I preview the principled shader, it's a little bit easier to see now. The scratches are a bit more rough. Then what I also want to do is search for a hue saturation value, and we'll put this after the lighten, and that way we'll have a value which we can drag up and down to add more roughness or make it more shiny. Now if you take this color here, the white color on the lighten, and turn it up and down, that's going to control the roughness of the scratches. But what I want to do is turn this into a number value so we can make it a slider. So I'm going to search for add, and we're going to add the math add node. Now let's take the value and we're going to drop it here into color B. Now the top value I'm going to turn to 1, and then the bottom value I'm going to turn to 0. So if I zoom into the scratches, now if I turn the value up and down, you can see if the value is turned way down to like 0, the scratches are going to be really shiny. Or if I turn it all the way up to like 1, then the scratches are going to be really rough. So we can use that value there in the custom node group to control the roughness of the scratches. So if I just zoom out here, now what I want to do is just finish the overall material settings. So I'm going to make the base color this bright orange, but you can add whatever color you want. And the hex code for this is going to be E55700. Now, if you wanted to, you could, for example, open up the coat here and like turn up the coat weight if you want to add a bit of clear coat to it. So you could do that if you want to. I'm not really going to do that. And you could also open up the transmission and make it more of like a clear plastic if you want to. But I'm not going to use any of those settings because this is just going to be a basic plastic material. So that is it for the procedural material. So I'm going to box select all the nodes except the material output, and I'll hit Control G to join them together into a node group, and I'll hit Tab to go outside the node group, and I'll drag the node group over here, and let's drag this out to make it bigger, and I'll copy the material name and just paste it here into the node group, and then let's go back into the node group, and I'll hit the N key to open up the side panel, and if you go to the group tab, you can double click on this to rename it, and I'll just rename that to shader because I like that better. So now let's add up all the custom values. So what we're going to do is take the mapping scale and put that into the extra socket. And then if we click on the scale to make it one value, we'll change the vector to float, and I'll turn the default value to 1. Let's go outside the node group, and I'll turn the scale back to 1. And then we'll go back into the node group. Then I want to control the scale of the scratches. So I'll drag the group input right down here. And on the second noise here, we'll put the scale into the extra socket. And I'm just going to call this scratches scale. Then I want to add the base color, so I'm going to drag the group input right up here, and let's put the base color into the extra socket. And then I want to control the noise scale, so I'll drag this right back over here to the noise, which is controlling the roughness, and I'll put the scale into the extra socket there, and let's just rename this to noise scale. Then I want to control the detail values for the noise, so let's put this detail into the extra socket, and then this roughness into this extra socket. And I'm going to call this noise detail 1, and then the other value I'm going to call noise detail 2, because the roughness really is kind of like a second detail value. Then I want to control the roughness of the material, so I'll drag the group input right over here, and we're going to take the hue saturation value, and we'll take the value and put that into the extra socket, and let's just rename this to roughness. Then I just want to control the scratches roughness. So if I drag the group input right over here, we have this add here. So if I just zoom into one of the scratches, if I turn this up and down, that's going to make the scratches really shiny or really rough. So I'll put the value into the extra socket here, and I'll just rename that to scratches roughness. And then finally, I want to control the bump strength. So if we drag the group input down here, we'll put the strength into the extra socket, and I can just rename this to bump strength. Let's hit the N key to close the side panel, and I'll drag the group input back here, and I'll hit the Tab key to go outside the node group. So here's the final material. So we have the scale of the entire material. Let's make the base color like really dark for now, just so I can see it better. So we have the scale of the material. Then we also just have the scratches scale. There's the base color, and then there's the noise scale. Then we have two different detail values for the noise. We also have the roughness of the material, and then we just have the scratches roughness and the bump strength for the scratches. So I can make the scratches really strong if I want to. Also, if I turn the bump strength down and then turn the scratches roughness to 0, now it's just kind of like a very basic plastic material without any scratches, because I've turned the scratches roughness down and the bump down. But I do just want a tiny little bit of scratches. It kind of adds some nice surface imperfections. So let's hit Alt-H to unhide everything. We'll save the project again, and I'm going to select the pipe. We'll click on New to add a new material, and I'm going to call this material Clear Plastic. So for this material, I want to start by creating kind of those little lines texture, which kind of makes the pipe look pretty cool. So I'm going to search for the Gabor texture. Let's drop it here, and I'll preview the Gabor texture, and I'll hit Control-T with the Gabor selected, and we're going to use the object coordinates, just like we've done before. Now you can see there's like some little lines on the Gabor texture, so I'm going to turn the scale to 200. But then I'll leave all the other settings how they are. So now we have some nice lines there. So let's search for a bump node, drop the bump node right here, and the value is going to go into the height value, and then the bump normal can go into the normal, and we'll just preview the principal shader. So now you can see there's some like little bumps there, kind of some line bumps. Now for the base color, I'm going to make this fully white. For the roughness, let's turn this down to like a 0.1, so it's a pretty shiny plastic. And then we can open up the transmission, and we'll turn the transmission all the way up to 1, so it is a shiny plastic. But if you want to make it look more like a PVC pipe or something, you could turn that down and make it not clear, but I'm going to turn the weight up. Now you can see that bump is way too strong, so I'm going to turn the distance to a 0.00003. So it's going to be very subtle. So if I zoom in there, there's just some subtle bump there. Now what I'm going to do is add just a subtle scratches texture to this plastic to make it look a bit more realistic. So I'm going to add a noise texture. We'll drop this here. I'll plug the vector up to the vector of the noise, and I'll preview the noise. And I'll turn the scale to 20. I'll turn the detail up to 10. And then I'm going to turn the distortion to 1. Now to make this look even more like scratches, I'm going to duplicate the noise and drop it here so it's even more distorted. But for this noise texture, I'm just going to turn the scale to 5, so it's a lot smaller. So now to make this look like scratches, we need to make it more contrasted. So I'm going to search for ramp, and we're going to add a color ramp after the noise textures. And then I'm going to drag the black tab way over and drag the white tab over. And now you can see it looks like scratches because it's really contrasted. So I'm going to drag the black tab kind of to about here, and then drag the white tab over to about there. So there's just some subtle scratches, just a few scratches here and there. So let's just drag the principal shader back, and then I'm going to select the bump, and we're going to duplicate the bump node and drop it after the first one. And then the color ramp color can go into the height value, and then we can Control Shift, select the principal shader to preview it. And now if I zoom in there, you can see there's some nice scratches on the plastic. And for the distance here, I'm going to turn this to a 0.00005. So now you can see there's just like some subtle scratches, and you can control the strength of it with that bump there. So that is the procedural material. So I'm just going to box select all the nodes except the material output, and I'll hit Control G to join it together into a node group. Let's hit the Tab key to go outside the node group, and I'll drag the node group over here, and let's drag the node group out to make it bigger. And I'm going to copy the material name and just paste it here into the node group. So let's go back into the node group. And so now we have this group input, and we can plug up all the custom values to the group input to control them outside the node group. I'm also going to hit N to open up the side panel. And if we go to the group tab, I can double click on the group sockets here on the BSDF, and I'm going to call that shader because I like it better. So now let's take the mapping scale, and we'll put that into the group input because this mapping is plugged up to both textures, so it'll control the size of the entire material. Now if I click on the scale, I want to change the vector to float, so it is 1 value. Then I need to turn the default value back to 1, and then if I hit tab to go outside the node group, we'll turn the scale back to 1. Let's go back into the node group. So I now want to control the base color, so I'm going to drag the group input way over here, and let's put the base color into the extra socket. Then I want to control the line scale, so I'll drag the group input underneath the gabor or behind the gabor, and I'll put the scale into the extra socket, and let's just rename this to line scale. Then I want to control the scale of the scratches, so we'll take the second noise texture scale, I'll put that into the extra socket. And I'm going to rename this to scratches scale. And then I want to control the detail values and the roughness values of both of these textures to control the scratches details. So I'll put this detail value into a new socket, but then this detail value, I'll put it into the same socket. So this detail will control both of them at once. Then I'll put this roughness into a new socket, and then this roughness is going to go into the same exact socket. Then I'm going to rename these, so this one's going to be Scratches Detail 1, and this one is going to be Scratches Detail 2. And then I want to control the roughness, so I'll drag the input over here next to the principled shader, and I'll put the roughness into the extra socket, and then let's take the weight, and I'll put that into the extra socket. And this, instead of calling it transmission weight, I'm going to just call it transmission. Or you can also call it transparency, whatever you want to call it. Then I want to control the lines bump strength. So if we go over here to this bump, you can see that is controlling the lines. So I'll put the strength into the extra socket, and I'm going to call this lines bump strength. And the last one is going to be the scratches. So we'll take this bump strength, put that into the extra socket. And this last value we're going to call scratches bump strength. So I'll hit the N key to close the side panel. I'm going to drag the group input right back over here, and I'll hit tab to go outside the node group. So there's the final material. So we have the scale of the material. We can also change the base color of the plastic. We also have the line scale, and we also have the scratches scale. And then we have some different detail values for the scratches. So 2 different detail values to control the scratches. We then have the roughness of the plastic. We also have the transmission, and then we have the lines bump strength and the scratches bump strength. So let's hit Alt-H to unhide all of the objects. So I hope you enjoyed this tutorial. I hope you can find these materials useful for your projects, and thank you so much for watching. And if you'd just like to purchase these procedural materials to add them into your projects, you can purchase them with the links in the video description on my Gumroad store and Patreon page. Now, I've just recently updated my Ultimate Blender procedural material pack with these plastic materials, but also all of these most recent materials. So all of my existing customers can re-download the product files to get the updates with the new procedural materials. So my Ultimate procedural material pack comes with all of my procedural materials, and they're all pre-set up for Blender's asset browser with custom thumbnails, sorted catalogs, and customizable node groups. So once you've purchased and installed my Ultimate material pack as an asset library into Blender, then you can just drag and drop the procedural materials into your projects from the asset browser to quickly add materials to your 3D scenes. Or if you'd like to just purchase my most recent procedural materials, then you can purchase them with my next procedural material pack, which just comes with these most recent materials, so a link to that is in the description. And to learn how to create more procedural materials, you can check out my Blender procedural material tutorial playlist. So I hope you enjoyed the video, and thank you for watching.